Hello, I'm Ron Kendall, Vice President Commercial Sales with Unity Insurance, and I'm with
Tim Hilton, Director of Practice Advising with PEAKE Technology Partners. So today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity insurance updates for 2023. We're going to do a couple introductions for ourselves and the companies we work for. We're going to dive into cybersecurity in general, sort of hit some high-level topics for everybody to gain some understanding. And then also talk about cybersecurity insurance itself and what's changed and how you can get with the times and get a good policy. So first things first, I'm Tim from PEAKE. PEAKE is a healthcare IT services company that works with healthcare practices to provide IT support, cybersecurity, data hosting for EMRs, and phone systems as well.
Unity Insurance is owned by MedCai, our state medical society. We've been around since 1975, focused on providing insurance for healthcare and private practices.
So today we're talking about cyber insurance. There's some background is probably important of why things are changing. In 2020, insurance companies saw a huge increase in claims. They went from about 41.5% of their total intake was going out for claims to 73%. So that, as you can tell, that's a huge jump. So they lost a lot of money, which means they're trying to sort of recoup that and also make sure that never happens again. So as you can see on the right-hand side here, those are the premiums that have been going up. They've been increasing constantly since that happened. It's becoming more and more expensive, but more and more necessary to have cyber insurance at the same time.
So sometimes it's a tough sell when we're renewing policies and you're seeing 20 to 30% increases on cyber insurance, but it's not just specific to one company. We're seeing it across the board. So most of the companies have all taken some rate increases over the past couple of years.
Yeah, if an insurance company is raising rates, it's probably because they're paying out a lot.
Exactly.
So what is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is how we protect ourselves online. And to be honest, online really doesn't mean anything anymore because everybody's online all the time and every piece of equipment that you have is touching the internet in one way or the other. So it's how we protect ourselves from people who are trying to leverage that to steal or gain information from us. There's a lot that goes into that, and we'll try and break down a little bit of it here. So we have first our physical defenses. So we put up physical defenses, machinery, to protect us from unwanted traffic coming into our network. The first is firewalls. It's sort of your first line of defense. It looks at the data going in and out of the practice and blocks certain things that are not supposed to be coming in and out. The next is a router. Everybody has a router if you connect to the internet somewhere, rather outside of just using your phone for it. And even that technically does. They are the machines that allow us to connect to them. So you have one in your house, you have one in your office, and a lot of them will have firewalls built in or some level of security built in. The next is not as common. So intrusion detection systems. They are a piece of equipment that specializes in analyzing data that's coming in and out of a network to look for patterns that are possibly showing someone's doing something naughty. And that's what they're there for. And they're usually at much higher level and larger organizations. The next is multi-factor authentication. So there are some physical ones that we're going to discuss this in depth because it's now a requirement for cyber insurance. So it's something that we're going to address. But there are physical devices that can be in play for that. And then other network monitoring equipment. There are tons of different ones. There are hybrids of these different things, such as the Cisco Meraki security appliance line that is routers and firewalls combined. There's switches that will have some rudimentary security protocols, wireless access points that do, but there's tons of them. So the second thing that we want to talk about is processes, security processes. And these are things that you need to train your staff on or have somebody on staff that knows what to do. But they are ways that we act and interact with equipment and software. So the first is access control. So you want to have passwords that are strong, that are able to be remembered, and that you don't reuse too often. You want to have privileged access management, which has rules that are set by the organization to reduce and control who has access to what device or what piece of software. And we're going to dive into that a lot more later on because it is, it's a newer thing. Email is, is the most common vector for cyber attacks. Whether it's phishing or, opening the door, email is something that needs to be trained on. I know that you all, you've seen an increase in phishing,
Definitely.
and I'm sure we're going to talk about that later. And espionage as well. I mean, getting information through email is much easier than it is even by, from brute forcing your way into a network. It's way easier to just social engineer, which is a fancy term for look at, people's behavior online that you can see, such as on Facebook, LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever else, to then get, talk to them as if they should know who you are and then get information out of them, the hours of the practice or when people are there, or who's going to be there when. And then the last is security processes along the lines of physical media. So do not just pick up a USB drive off the street and plug it into your machine. Don't connect machines from home to your private network, that kind of stuff. Processes for your staff to know what not to do with their, with devices. So connecting, cell phones to the private network, that kind of thing. So security software and backups, these are very vital pieces of software that we use every day. The first one is backups. There are tons of different ways that you can back up your data, but it is one of the most important parts to a full cybersecurity environment is having a way to restore if the worst should happen. And that doesn't have to be cyber attacks. We had a practice that had a flood and it wiped out 2 server racks full of equipment. But we had backups stored in PEAKE Cloud and through a third-party vendor that we had them back up and running in a day and a half from that because of the fact that they had good backups, good backup hygiene. Password lockers, with the amount of software that people are required to use these days, you just won't remember the passwords. And if you do, it's because you're using a ton. So setting complicated passwords and using a password locker with single sign-on or multi sign-on allows you to have very complex passwords and not rely on the human element to necessarily remember them.
Good idea.
Yeah. Last is antivirus. Everybody should have this, but it allows you to protect yourself from, and your endpoint, your computer, from malicious code that is either scraping data or locking up your data. And then last but not least, we have multi-factor authentication and endpoint detection and response. Those we'll talk about a lot soon. So we want to prepare for the worst. It is what it is. It's 2023-ish. And we will be seeing more cyber attacks. You will more than likely have some kind of cyber crime affect your life in some way, shape, or form at least once next year. It's the way of the world now. 6 years ago, in 2015, healthcare really didn't have that much to worry about. It wasn't what we were seeing, in the top 5 or 6 or 10 even areas for cybercrime to affect. It was, energy and critical facilities, critical management, government organizations. But healthcare is now the clearest vector for attack for a lot of cybercrime. It's seen the most increase over the last 6 years of any other, and it's in the top 5 now for total cyber incidents. It is because, one, the healthcare field is not very well prepared for it, and it has very important information. Your personal health records are extremely important to you and the practice. So it's become an easy target and a very common target. So how do we prepare for the worst? One is, like I mentioned earlier, having backups. Having that ability to restore quickly and to a point very, short in the past allows you to get back up and running very quickly. Contract with an IT managed services provider or security vendor. Having an outside source looking at your network allows you to have, if you have an internal IT team, allows you to have someone checking their work. If you don't, you need to have this anyway to run your IT and your infrastructure and be making these decisions. Perform SRAs. Once again, you want somebody checking the work of the of whoever you're using, whether that's an IT managed service provider or internal IT, performing your SRAs, which you're technically required to do anyway, is a great way to sort of check and make sure that everything's happening and being done. Having cybersecurity insurance it should be a requirement. It's such a big issue these days that it's going to happen, and it's going to cost a ton of money. And having that insurance will really help take this thing out of that, because Ron's going to talk about it, but it covers so much more than you can possibly imagine. Usually when people hear cyber insurance, they are thinking, oh, it's just going to cover a ransom if it has it. But Ron will show you the list is 10 miles long of what it covers. Training your staff and taking it seriously. You need to take it seriously, your providers need to take it seriously, and your staff need to take it seriously. And that starts from the top. So you need to make sure that you're setting complex passwords, you're not sharing your account logins, and you need to train your staff regularly on this kind of thing.
So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about why buy cyber insurance. Healthcare is a targeted industry, one of the top 5 most targeted industries for cyber claims. And the reason for this is because of the monetary value of patient records and the information it's in those records. It's the hackers, that's what they want. In addition, it's a perception that healthcare has inadequate IT security, and also that healthcare traditionally would pay a ransom in order to not jeopardize their patient safety. Small practices are also a top target in that for the reasons we just discussed above, with just the monetary value of a patient record and the inadequate IT, the perception of that, along with paying ransoms, small practices are perceived to be an easier target for hackers.
So there's one other reason as well. So a lot of times smaller practices are interlinked with either a hospital system or an EMR system.
Yeah.
That EMR system, if it's hosted directly with them, and it has happened in the past where a small practice did not have the security, they then went through that small practice to get to a hoster of EMRs to lock up the entire, it was over 1,000 practices, the most recent one that happened, that had their data there, and they came in through a small practice, locked that up, and ransomed all of them together.
That's interesting.
So, yeah.
So cyber policy, does it cover non-electronic privacy breaches? And the answer to that is yes. For some practices that still maintain paper records, there's coverage for that, for any stolen information, as well as credit cards. Patients want to trust you with their personal information. When we sit down with a client, a lot of times we're trying to sell cyber insurance. The first response we get is that they have all their information stored in the cloud, or they work with their IT people for security. But you have to remember that your name is on the shingle, and your practice is, the bottom line is your practice is responsible to keep your patient records safe. And any claims that come in will come against your practice. So that's why you want to have cyber insurance. First party versus third party. So there's a difference in the policy contracts for first party, which pays out for items like monitoring of patient credit, the cost involved to notify all your patients, to have someone come in and analyze your security system to determine where the breach came from, to pay for ransom money that would be paid for ransoms, as well as reputational harm. Where a third party is going to cover things like if you're sued by a patient, it covers the damages, it covers the attorney's fees, as well as any other expenses related to that, as well as fines and penalties that could be assessed by governmental or state agencies. 80% of physicians have experienced some sort of a cyber attack. Remember, it's not if, but when you'll have that attack. And chances are you've already had cyber attacks, or your system's been tested, and you just may not be aware of it. Data breach claims can be as high as $400 per patient record. So if you think about the number of patient records that you store and multiply that times 400, and think about the catastrophic loss that could happen if you had a breach like that. I mean, it could really be damaging to your practice without insurance. And don't assume that your business insurance policy offers the coverage. We sell business insurance and we look at policies every day, and most of them only carry a very small amount of cyber insurance, if at all. So the only way you can increase that is usually by endorsements, and then you have to look at the contract that you're signing for the cyber on your business policy, because a lot of those coverages may not be as broad as what you can find on an individual policy. And some of the limits that's available to healthcare could be capped as well. So what are you paying for when you buy cyber insurance? Well, the first thing is the breach costs, and that is the monies that are paid out to provide credit monitoring for your patients, which you may be required to do in the event of a breach. Also, for notification costs, you're going to have to notify all your patients that there's been a breach. Security and privacy liability, that's going to cover the potential lawsuits from a patient who may sue you for a breach of their information. And of course, it's paying for the damages that could occur, as well as attorney's fees and other expenses involved. Privacy, regulatory, defense, and penalties. So you could also be subjected to fines and penalties from state and governmental agencies for how your compliance is put in place for your security policies.
So there's a set amount that you would get charged for a HIPAA violation. Is it $10,000 per record or something like that?
I think it is $10,000 per record, which is huge when you think about how many patient records that you have. PCI and DSS liability. So you could also incur fines and penalties from your bank and from your credit card companies that you work with for just non-compliance of what your security contracts may be that you sign with those companies. Breach remediation costs are security measures that are put in place to help mitigate future cyber claims. Brand guard is the monies that pay for loss of net profits due to adverse media reports, and also helps to restore your reputation in the community. System failure is monies that are paid when there's a breach, and you could have compromised or damaged data. It also pays for loss of business income. So in the event that you're shut down due to a breach for days, weeks, and even months, as we've seen with some larger breaches, it pays the expenses to keep your practice running. And cyber extortion. So the cyber extortion pays monies out for ransom. If your patient records are hacked into and they're held ransom, it pays to pay the ransom.
I have one quick thing there. So first of all, you have to understand a lot of these places are a business. Some of them even have help desk IT support. I mean, that you're communicating with and talking to. So they have a vested interest in, when you do pay out the ransom, that they give you everything back. But, it is a huge problem where if you get locked up, you're at their mercy. They can charge you whatever they like. There was a practice that we have that we know of that was, that was ransomed, and when they were were told the number, and they replied back, it was at that point that the hackers have realized, oh, we have a healthcare practice, and they added a zero onto the end of the number, making it just 10 times more expensive than it was, just because they now know that it's a healthcare practice and they have to pay this out and get the patient records safe. So,
and in these computer hacks, also you have to remember in healthcare that you have patients scheduled for surgeries and various other things that are going on, and a lot of times when you have no system to operate from, these things have to be canceled, which puts a patient's life in jeopardy, and that's another reason why they focus on that, because the healthcare may just pay the ransom to get out from under it and not risk their patient safety. Cybercrime, one of the more common claims that we see now, and that has a lot to do with the emails and phishing schemes that your employees may see. The type of things that we see are a partner or a physician will direct their practice manager to pay a third-party vendor that normally would be paid by that practice administrator, and the administrator is not realizing the emails coming from it's a bogus or rogue email, and they pay out the vendor, and all of a sudden the money's going to a hacker, and then the practice is out that money. And what happens there is that two things: you do have insurance, hopefully, to protect you in those type of claims, because it would be covered. But you also have, of course, your bank when it involves fraud, a type of bank fraud. The problem is it usually takes a bank 5 to 6 months to investigate these types of issues, which will lead you to be out of that money because the insurance isn't going to pay until they determine how much the bank's going to pay, and then they make up the difference. Reward expenses are monies paid out to an informant that leads to an arrest or prosecution of a computer hacker. And then court attendance costs are reasonable expenses for you to attend court if you're prosecuting someone that's hacked into your system.
Yeah, that's so much that it covers. I mean, and a lot of that stuff is not stuff that you originally even think about when you associate cyber insurance.
Exactly.
It's just not even something that I would have thought about sometimes.
It does
court attendance fees, for example. I didn't even think about that.
Yep, exactly. So risk management, what can you do to mitigate future claims? So the first thing would be to contract with an external IT support provider. And, we recommend PEAKE. I mean, this is an organization that focuses on healthcare. And so when you have that, they're going to be more familiar with your practice and what your needs are, as well as they do a great job for Unity Insurance, they're our IT provider. If budget permits, having an IT person in-house is also a good idea. Just the fact that person's there to maybe identify potential issues and just to talk to your employees about what to look out for is always a good thing. Cyber education for employees is also paramount, just so the employees are educated on what to look for so they don't fall for the bogus emails and the types of things that they could run into on a daily basis. Formalizing an in-house cybersecurity policy is also a good idea. And putting it into the employee handbook would be a fantastic idea as well.
All right. So as we alluded to, the requirements have changed. They've increased in the last few years. So in 2023, we're going to talk about 3 main issues that we see a lot with cyber insurance. They're newer terms, but the first is multi-factor authentication. So usually everybody should be familiar with this, whether they know they are or not. So for example, if you get an email from when you're logging into somewhere and it says we need to send you an email or a text message, that's multi-factor authentication. There are way more sophisticated ways of doing this, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So multi-factor authentication is one of 3 things. It's something you know, something you are, or something you have. So the most common one is something you know, or at least it used to be. It was the security questions when you would log into your bank. It was usually with security questions, so I'm just going to say that. But now it's transitioning more into something you have. So a lot of times it's, your phone. A lot of times, it'll text your phone with a code or a number that you need to enter in. Usually with PEAKE, we recommend that they use a piece of software. We use a product called Duo that allows you to get in and out very quickly. It provides that code for you. Mm-hmm. In the higher level cybersecurity, they usually use what's called RSA tokens. They're little devices that allow you to log into things, and it has to be physically close to the machine that you're trying to log into, and utilizes RFIDs to do that. Mm-hmm. And then, or something you are. This is not that common. I was promised that it would be by cartoons in the early 90s that this would be how we do everything, scanning your eyes or whatever. But it is, it does exist, where you do fingerprints or facial recognition software or, scanning your eyeball, etc. Those do exist, but they're not very common. So usually it's the something you have nowadays. So the next thing is a little higher level. It's not as common for people to talk about, but we're seeing it be required more. And that's something called privilege access management. So in the IT, and especially the cybersecurity world, the number 1 rule is zero trust. So don't trust anybody with anything ever. Obviously that doesn't work for the real world because we have to trust people to remember passwords and log into things or else they can't work. So privilege access management is how we manage everybody's privilege to access certain things. So privilege in this case really just means what do you have the ability to do within the X system or piece of software or whatever. So you want to restrict that as much as possible. But that's a balance that you need to find between productivity and security with that. So having your IT team go through and really review who has access to what, why do they have access to everything, and and do they need access to things? Because you never know what they're going to be able to really get to from other places. And that's also a part of it, is what can they get to? You really should never share login information with anybody. You should have your own dedicated accounts for things. I know it costs more, but you should, because otherwise it kind of throws this whole thing off. And if your cyber insurance policy provider finds out about it, they will be very upset, and so will your IT team probably, or they'll pull their hair out and run around screaming. So the third thing I want to talk about, we're seeing this more and more, and it goes by different names. An endpoint detection response, EDR. It also can be called advanced detection response. There's a few different ways it can be known. What it really is a piece of software that utilizes AI and other means to analyze traffic on an endpoint and activities on an endpoint, and an endpoint is a computer or device, and looks for anomalies or things that are weird and flags them. So for example, if you use your machine the same every day, and then all of a sudden you start doing something really weird and different that could be malicious, it's going to identify that and say, hey, IT team, there's a problem here. This is acting weird. And you know what? Maybe you just installed this new piece of software because you need it. But it'll at least flag it for the IT team to then go and say, hey, what is this? All right, this is real, this is not. But it's another way for us to identify issues that are happening. And it also will provide remediation. It also can act autonomously. So it can lock down devices. You can set boundaries where if it analyzes something at a certain threat level, it'll sequester that and any device that it's touched, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very cool software. It's expensive, and it is pretty new. This is one of those things where maybe cyber insurance companies have gone a little far. Some of this stuff is a little outside of the realm of your average business that would probably not have some of this stuff, but it's becoming more and more common. We're seeing it more and more. We utilize different endpoint detection response softwares, and it's becoming more common. So it's something you should definitely be on the lookout for.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that explanation, because I can tell you on a cyber application, the two things that we've seen in the last couple of years, and it's a big deal with eligibility for cyber insurance, is the MFA and the endpoint detection. And it's great to get an education from you on what that exactly is, because I have to explain it to my clients who want to know what that's all about. So, it's like I said, it's becoming a lot more difficult when applying for cyber insurance as far as the information that needs to be completed. And, we always recommend, using your IT people to help complete the applications.
Yeah.
So that's all we have today, folks. We appreciate you joining us. We've done a lot of research into this topic between PEAKE Technologies and Unity Insurance, and we feel like we're an expert resource for you for future reference or any questions you may have. So we thank you for tuning in.
Yeah. And if you want, reach out to either of us at any point. We'd be more than happy to come and either take a look at your IT systems for you, or review your cyber insurance policies, or I assume you also sell other types of insurance too.
Okay. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So any type of insurance, call Ron and we'll get you taken care of.